Hello again, and welcome back to the channel. This hasn't taken long for me to realise just how vague my first video on equipment was. I think I was trying to cram too much conceptual stuff in there without actually showing stats or relevant gameplay. I've been thinking about how I could better tackle this issue in World of Tanks, and I've come up with an analysis style video on specific equipment pieces. You'll get what I'm trying to do as the video goes on, but the short version is you've only got a limited amount of equipment slots in this game. There are hundreds of combinations you can have in equipment loadouts, so which is the best? I've realised I can't effectively answer this question in one video. There's simply too many possibilities to cover. So what I'm going to do is change the focus and make a case for why you should or shouldn't pick a specific piece of equipment. The first video is going to be on one of the most common choices, the gun rammer. Alright, so the gun rammer is probably one of the most commonly picked pieces of equipment. I haven't really got stats to back this claim up, but I think it's a pretty safe assumption to make. The gun rammer decreases the reload time of your tank by 10% base, and for those of you who are on PC, you can improve this to 11.5% on your tank destroyers by putting it in the designated firepower slot, or purchase the improved loading equipment, which is basically a premium gun rammer, for 5,000 bonds to push it to 13.5%. The benefit of this equipment is, of course, your tank's gun will fire faster. This is useful for a huge variety of reasons, which depend on your tank and what you've gotten yourself into in-game. But while this is an obvious benefit, the rammer is still taking up an equipment slot. By mounting this, you're putting the ability to fire faster above other improvements, and in most cases, you'd be absolutely right. Every tank benefits from firing faster, but a larger benefit could be found in mounting an alternative piece of equipment. Let's cover when you should mount this equipment. The first instance is for general performance, getting the most out of your tank in any game mode that you take it into. Your mindset does come into play here. As I mentioned in a previous video, there are two schools of thought generally for equipment setup. The typical tank has good and bad base stats when compared to the average. There are tanks with good damage output, but they suffer in other areas. There are also tanks with bad damage output like light tanks, which excel in other areas. On screen is a table of the average damage outputs for class and tier in case you want to know what you're comparing against. But the decision to mount the rammer largely comes down to your style. There are two styles you need to think about. Chances are you do fit into one of these two. The first style or group, who I'm going to call the all-rounders, use equipment and other resources on their tank to improve weak base statistics. This does bizarrely result in a bigger flat improvement than the other group because the way World of Tanks has most of their tank stats set up, at least the ones you can improve for the most part, is the larger a statistical value is, the worse the statistic. So improving a worse statistic will provide a larger flat bonus than improving a better statistic because most equipment and skills improve aspects of the tank by a percentage. A percentage of a larger value is itself larger. But what about the value we're most interested in after fitting a rammer? What about DPM? Isn't this an exception? Well, yes, a larger DPM value is obviously better, but that value is not changed by the gun rammer itself. It is changed as a result, but the actual statistic that the gun rammer affects is the reload time. So in terms of a larger outright benefit, a tank like the FV4005 is going to have a greater reduction than an Object 140 because 10% of 30 seconds is more than 10% of 5 seconds. So this group is unlikely to fit a rammer on the machine with good DPM because it's already good. They'd rather invest an equipment slot into a below average aspect to bring it closer to the average. I believe that Quickie Baby belongs to this group. I think his Masterclass series demonstrates that way of thinking. Anyway, the second group, who we'll coin the specialists, are of a different mentality. They accept that the tank will be good in some areas and bad in others, and boost the stats that are already good to make them fantastic. It does produce a smaller flat result than the other group, but because the base statistic was already above average, they specialise the tank in that field, making it one of the best in that regard. So, returning to the data on average DPM, If a specialist were setting up a tank with above average DPM, i.e. any value significantly higher than the value for the tank class and tier, they would recognise it as one of the tank's strengths and likely fit a rammer. In summary then, this small table illustrates the behaviour of each style or group in the face of a tank with above average or below average DPM. Personally, if it was me, I'd fall into the specialist camp for most of my equipment choices. I look at what a tank is good at and bad at and try and improve these good parts even more. This is partly because I'm intrinsically lazy. I can't be bothered to keep in mind the stats of every other tank in the game at any one time. So if I'm driving a tank that has good DPM, I'm making it even better because I know that I will have a better reload than at least every similar tank to my own then in-game. Okay, now onto a different topic for this next reason for fitting a rammer. I touched on the first reason being for better performance, but what is a better performance? What are you trying to do in your games? For most people, it's winning the game. If you're grinding XP or want to boost your win rate, your primary goal is obviously to win. However, there is another performance measure that is measured in game, and that is marks of excellence. The sort of symbols, the stars, stripes, and strange symbols you see on your tank's gun barrel when you reach a certain threshold. I'm not going to go into details over how marks of excellence are earned in this video. For now, let's just leave it at the more damage you do per game, the higher up you go, and the more marks you'll get. Marks of excellence don't give you anything in game apart from an ego boost. On top of that, it gives you a pretty good reason to play tanks that you enjoyed while grinding up a line. They're a status symbol, but also an extra challenge you can take on if you want. But why would you fit a gun rammer? It's because of the way the game calculates your standing in the Marks of Excellence rankings. You have to purely average more combined damage per game than a specific percentage of players in your tank over the past 14 days to earn a mark. You're not trying to outperform the average DPM, you're trying to outperform everybody else playing the exact same tank as you. Therefore, even if your tank has comparably bad DPM comparison to similar tanks, your tank will have a DPM advantage over everyone else playing that same tank if you mount a rammer, giving you an advantage in the standings because your tank can dish out damage faster than it otherwise would. The final aspect for installing a gun rammer I think is worth talking about is bizarrely for tracking shots. I haven't been able to find reliable data for how long it takes a crew to repair the tracks as standard on either edition. There appears to be differences between classes, but I'm not sure about tiers. And then there's the effect of equipment and commander skills, etc., to take into consideration, but with no base value, I can't calculate it. In this respect, the fitting the gun rammer benefits only those tanks which already have quite rapid firing guns, by which I mean a reload time of about 7 seconds or less. When you destroy an enemy's track, it immobilises their tank, allowing your team to get damage, and you subsequently gain XP from tracking damage, which contributes to more XP, marks of excellence standing, and probably your chances of winning. However, especially since the advent of refreshing repair kits, it's more than likely that the enemy will immediately repair their tracks. On the off chance you track someone and they don't have a repair kit available, an opportunity can present itself to tanks with higher rates of fire. You will be able to repeatedly shoot the enemy vehicle in the tracks before the crew can make the repair, locking it in place almost permanently. This leads to a lot of damage and quite often a kill. A gun rammer widens the window for this to occur. Again, this is a more niche improvement you'll see with a rammer. Most of the time the enemy will have a repair kit, but you forcing them to use it early may win you the fight in the long run. I thought this point was just worthy enough to mention because it can lead to a large amount of damage and almost a guaranteed kill if you're lucky to catch one. Right, I've talked about the benefits of fitting a rammer. I think I've made a case for fitting one, but now I'm going to make a case for fitting any other piece of equipment in its place. The first instance is when you're driving a tank with an extremely long reload. Not an autoloader, because autoloaders can't fit rammers. I'm talking about the Death Star, the FV4005, the Jagdpanzer 100, basically any tank with a reload longer than about 15 seconds. You may be thinking that this is just my psychology coming back from the previous point. If the DPM is bad, don't bother and improve something else. That's not the case I'm making here. In World of Tanks, DPM is not spread constantly. It's split between the instances where you score a penetrating hit on an enemy. When you're jamming a tank with a very long reload, you have far fewer opportunities to fire and keep that damage output going. A gun rammer may help you against other tanks with a long reload, but against the average enemy tank, it's extremely unlikely that you'll get a second shot off in a straight up brawl. The core point here is the gun rammer will not provide you an opportunity to fire again in most combat situations at closer ranges. Despite the reduced reload, you still have a long reload. This is why I put forward that you instead mount equipment that improves the gun handling of the tank by reducing aim time, dispersion, or other stats. The reason I say this is because you're investing all of your damage output into 1 or 2 shots per minute. You want to prioritize maximizing the chance that those shots do their damage. Even in longer range encounters where you're sniping at opponents, equipment that improves gun handling will increase your chances of hitting your target. Outside of that specific situation, there isn't a definitive case where you should take something other than a rammer every time. There will be a trade-off, and you've got to decide what you think will benefit the tank most. The guidance for whether you should fit one is clearer at the extremes when it comes to reloads, but when you're closer to the average DPM output, it really does come down to what you prefer and what you think you're capable of in the tank. I may revisit this topic with a bit more statistical approach. I wanted to do it in this video, but the data stored on sites like tomato.gg and WoT replays don't have the data on equipment choices, so I think I'd have to build my own app to determine it and collect large scale data that I can use for analysis. You never know though, I might get around to it. In the meantime though, that about does it for this video. I hope it has informed your choices when taking a gun rammer. There's very little reason not to take one, but I think there's a certain situations where it's outright better or worse than other equipment. If you like the video, give it a like and consider subscribing for more content like this. Thanks for joining me, enjoy whatever you're doing, and I'll see you in the next one.